Hello, everyone, and welcome to the VML sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. We are an 11-week long MTG Arena league which showcases the talents of amazing people of the marginalized genders within the Magic community. We are in the finals already. There were 128 players and only 8 remaining. So today we are going to showcase one of the games of the quarterfinals, and then we will have the semifinals and the finals live. I have two amazing guests here with me, Nile and Arya. Welcome, both of you. Very exciting to be already in the finals here today. And we are before we look at our meta breakdown, Arya, what deck do you think we'll see most represented in the top 8, or what deck would you expect for here today?
Honestly, I'd expect a lot of diversity. The standard format's pretty mixed up. We know many VML players, Sanctum players are fans of the Slogurk decks. I'd expect to see some amount of Analyst, some Control, some Convoke. So really, a little bit of everything is what I'm expecting.
What about you, Niall? Also expecting a lot of the diversity, or any deck that you think we are going to see more?
Totally agree with Arya there. I think Standard is in a really good spot right now where no matter what kind of deck you like to play, there is a good deck for it. You like aggro decks, you like mid-range decks, you like control, combo, whatever you want to play, there is a viable deck for it. And what we have seen week after week in the VML is this diversity of decks, and I don't foresee that changing tonight.
I completely agree. So let's take a look here at our meta breakdown for our finals here of the VML. So it looks like two players decided to bring Azorius Control, and the rest we have, as you expected, a very diverse meta with Esper Midrange, Boros Convoke, Temur Analyst, 5 color Legends, Bant Toxic, and 4 color Analyst. So two analyst decks as well, one being Temur, the other one being 4 color. But Arya, are you surprised by this meta breakdown, or kind of what you expected?
Yeah, pretty much what I expected. Seven different decks out of eight is pretty good. Can't really complain. And yeah, just a lot of known quantities here. I want to draw attention maybe to Bant Toxic as a slightly less represented deck in general in standard. Not nearly as played as Esper Midrange or Azorius Control, but a really strong meta pick for if you expect a lot of these controlling decks and analyst decks. So kudos to whoever brought that. Clearly prepared well for the field.
Yeah, and I just want to showcase that the 8 players that made it into the top 8, they already are qualified for the regional championships, as well as the VML championships. We will qualify for the Pro Tour, which is a great achievement. So all of these players already, congratulations, they have achieved amazing results. Unfortunately, we cannot see all the games from the top 8, which is quite sad, but just congratulations to all the players because they have done amazing. Can we take a look here at our first game that we are going to see from the quarterfinals? It's going to be the only game from the quarterfinals that we are going to see. Starting here with TexasRanger MTG. They were in Division 11, seated number 30, and they decided to bring Boros Convoke. Now, Nile, what do you think of this Boros Convoke list here?
I mean, Boros Convoke, I think, for as long as it has been a powerhouse in Standard, has proven to be extremely powerful. You obviously have these sort of like pioneer turns where you can just, have these explosive starts that pretty much no one can keep up with. And that feels so incredible. But then, even beyond that, it is able to just be a solid aggro deck with a lot of options and choices. So I really love it. I really love Convoke. I'm excited to see it tonight. Also, really love their Waffle House picture here.
Arya, so TexasRanger MTG is going against Jason, which is a very well known member of the community here of the VML. Knowing that Jason loves to play Slogurk, which we're going to see here, are you surprised that TexasRanger decided to bring Boros Convoke? Do you feel like it's a good matchup?
I think it's a good matchup for Boros Convoke if you're on the play, which is really important here. I mean, honestly, we've seen Jason. I mean, it's a prolific player. We see top 8, multiple Pro Tours, really just killing it right now. And we've seen it lose twice in the top 8, specifically in the quarterfinals, to Boros Convoke in Premier events. So if I was playing against Jason in the quarterfinals of an event, definitely the deck I'd want to bring to beat it would be exactly Convoke. And I mean, part of what makes this 5-color Legends deck so strong is it's pretty good at competing on a bunch of different axes. There's not really a single deck that has a lopsidedly favored matchup against it. So bringing something like Convoke that's proactive can leverage being on the play. And well, you've seen beat Jason a bunch of times. Definitely what I do in this spot.
Yeah, so Jason has lost quite a bit against Convoke in our VML's top 8. So maybe it will break the curse now, but I have to say I love the replies here for the quiz. Gurk, 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 gurk. It's just the answer for everything. Nile, what do you think of these 5-color legend list here by Jason?
I think the Slogurk list is extremely fascinating in just looking at its evolution over time and different colors that it has tried on and taken off. And I think it's at like a very powerful sort of end point. I mean, the deck has like 2 more weeks to live, right, before it's out of standard. I really like the innovation of adding white to it. I think it's very powerful. Like Arya was saying, there's just so many different axes on which this deck can fight. It's extremely versatile.
Okay, so let's take a look here as our players are ready for these quarterfinals. Very excited to see how these turns out. Again, Arya, you said going first is very important, so looks like TexasRanger on a good start here. What do you think of this opening hand?
I quite like this hand. I mean, it's not the fastest hand the deck could have. In really any ideal hand for this deck, you'd have Gleeful Demolition. That's the thing that lines up best against one-for-one interaction and just outpaces a lot of what your opponents can do. But barring a Gleeful Demolition hand, 1-drop into 2-drop into 3-drop is exactly what this deck wants to be doing.
So looks like here the curve is going to be very important. As you said, no gleeful demolition, unfortunately, but a lot of options for Texas Ranger. Now, Nile, Rona is a very key card for these Slugger deck, right? It really enables the engine start going off.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say Rona is probably one of the most key pieces of the engine for the deck, especially, once you get the relic down and you're able to start generating a bunch of mana off of Rona, or you get Inti down, you're able to really take advantage of these discard triggers. It is definitely a very key piece of the puzzle and one that you're quite happy to have on turn 2.
So we saw Texas Ranger attack with everything, even losing one creature there. How important is to keep just applying this pressure super early on, even if at the cost of losing a bit of the board area?
I think it's really important and pretty much what this matchup is about. There's a lot of matchups where, you want to go wide, go long, knowing that your opponent's not going to be able to deal with you with 1-for-1 removal. And so eventually you'll just be able to win by going wide. But against something like Slogurk, where there's a combo element to it, the deck goes over the top of just going wide with a Convoke pod pretty easily. So you need to be sure to apply pressure and set up the deck to be able to close quickly in the mid game rather than play a long game. So I really like the decision to attack there rather than wait further.
Yeah, and it looks like here, Jason, I mean, trying to find something that Rona really helps with the card selection, but no third land drop yet.
Yeah, it looks
Okay,
like
there
we
you
are
go.
going to get that third land drop.
Yeah, that's very important, but the Slogger deck doesn't really have board wipes, right? I mean, it has cut down. I think that's the main source of removal, as well as the lands that can bounce with Tawara, maybe, but not a lot of board wipes, right, Nile? I mean, at least not in the main deck.
Yeah, not in the main deck. In the side, there are a few pest controls But I mean, as far as removal goes, as you mentioned, the channel lands, we have a cut down, go for the throats. Urtai can get rid of stuff, but the board is certainly a problem.
Arya, you were talking earlier about rotation. So Slogurk is completely going to disappear out of the meta. Do you think that Convoke also is going to lose a lot of its key cards, or it can still be powerful after rotation?
Convoke will definitely lose some of its power after rotation, in particular Voldar and Epicure rotating means the deck's not going to have the same two different cards on one that produce both a creature and an artifact. So there's only going to be Novice Inspector filling that role. And what that means is the deck's not going to be as reliably going turn 2 Gleeful Demolition. And that ceiling is a lot of what makes the deck's power. But even without that ceiling, the deck is still very much a real contender. So unlike Slogurk, I would expect this deck to at least exist post rotation, just maybe not be quite as strong.
And we see here, I mean, Rona untapping also pretty important. We have Honest Rustine, another key card from the Slogurk deck. I feel like Jason really trying here to come back with the board. We know that TexasRanger has some cards, but there's no way to deal some extra damage yet. So looks like Jason might be able to, never mind. What a top deck there.
Yeah, that is definitely the card that they were looking for. I mean, even without it, you know, that pixie in the air is already like a very big threat. But looks like this is probably just gonna do it. Yep.
Game one here for TexasRanger with Boros Convoke. I mean, again, I feel like going on the play, very important, as you said, Arya. That top deck was also pretty good because I felt like otherwise Jason might get the opportunity to stabilize there. Now, sideboard, Nile, what do you think we can see here from the Boros Convoke deck?
Yeah, so from the Boros Convoke deck, I mean, we already see that these pixies are coming out. I think this is a situation where you don't really want to do too much. Um, you don't have that many pieces that are that important. I mean, the invasions, I think, are quite nice, but I think a light touch is good in this situation. And, you know, you're hoping to basically just do that all over again. And if you don't, you get another game on the play.
And we cannot see, but Arya, what do you expect Jason to bring from the sideboard in the Slogger deck?
So out of this Slogurk deck, I just want to bring as much interaction in as possible post-board. We see there's some amount of board wipes. There's notably 3 copies of Pest Control. That's the card I'd expect to see this game kind of be played around. In TexasRanger spot, you got to be worrying about that, playing around that. And in Jason State, you got to be hoping to draw that as early as possible. So that's definitely going to dominate these post-board games, regardless of whether we actually see it show up. And then beyond that, there's cut downs in Jason's pod, there's Dreams of Steel, Null, and Duress, just cheap interaction. You want to go low to the ground and make sure you don't die so that you can actually win with that powerful combo late game engine.
Looks like both players add to Mulligan. TexasRanger did have a first hand that was a bit awkward with the mana, with one of the lands entering tapped. Right now, what do you think, Nile, about the second opening? We already know that Jason also moved to 6.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit awkward. You know, I mean, you do have a lot of things that you can cast, but you don't really have red mana. I mean, going down to 5 is really tough, I think. So probably you just end up keeping it and going for it, but I think it's pretty close.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, Myrex is a very interesting card, but with the mana, as you said, is a bit awkward.
yeah. The nice thing about a hand like this is it does apply a really fast clock. We see with Warden of the Inner Sky into playing out Novice Inspector and a second Warden on turn 2, this hand applies a lot of pressure really quickly and at least has an engine going, which I think is hard for the Boros deck to do in a mulligan. So something that at least makes us probably better than most fives for Texas Ranger.
Yeah, but when you mulligan, what you don't want to see is Dreams of Steel and Oil right as a start to disrupt your end. But as you said, that Warden starts, it's a very good start. And if Jason doesn't have cut down, it might start applying some pressure.
Yeah, and it looks like, getting that Inspector off the top, we can still double spell this turn.
So that was a great turn. I mean, not really a follow up yet, but this also allows you to scry. Now, Arya, how do you feel about Warden of the Inner Sky as a card design here for Boros Convoke? I mean, because it's a card that is played a lot, and I feel like it has a very interesting design.
Yeah, I really like Warden. I feel like it does a good job kind of bridging the gap for these Boros decks. These decks that care a lot about going wide. In Pioneer, you have multiple pieces to go with your Convoke cards. You have both your Venerated Loxodon and Knight Errant of Eos. Here you have just the one, but in Knight Errant and Warden does a really good job bridging the gap between those two things.
Very interesting there. So there was a knight on top. Why do you think Texas decided to bottom? Maybe expecting some removal from Jason?
Yeah, so in this spot with priority, the cut down Jason had was pretty telegraphed. In Texas Ranger spot, it's pretty easy to recognize if you played a lot of arena that what Jason has in the spot is a cut down, and given that's why we saw an attack before putting the counter on the Warden, and that's also why we saw the Knight Errant Defeaters go to the bottom because it's just really weak, assuming Jason does have that removal spell.
So Nile, now a tough decision with that cavern, right? Because if you say vampire, you are able to now get the Volderan EP cure, but then you don't have a way to cast later on your recruiter. But this way, you human, you do. Do you think that's a nice decision there with the human?
Yeah, I think the Immodanes are just more important in general, but also the fact that we have two of them in our hand as opposed to the one Epicure, I think just makes for much more impactful turns over the next couple turns. And if we at any point draw a red source, we get to go Epicure into Immodanes, and there it is.
There it is. You were foretelling this, and that's going to be quite an aggressive attack here from Texas Ranger that started with a hand that was not ideal. I mean, a mule and then Jason starting as well with some end disruption, but this deck quickly applying a lot of pressure.
Yeah, definitely applying a lot of early pressure, which is nice. I think hitting that mountain was pretty nice, but Jason's certainly not out of it. I mean, the Slogurk has gotten quite large. We have an NT on the board. A lot of the pieces of the puzzle are there, even though it does look a bit dire.
Yeah. The main issue for the Slogurk deck in a spot like this is that at the end of the day, it is a critical mass combo deck. So you need your Relic, you need like a few different pieces, you need Old Rutstein. And the Slogurk deck's pretty good at playing a value game and slowly assembling that over the course of several turns, with Slogurk bouncing and functionally drawing you cards a bunch of times off of its abilities. But when you're under a lot of pressure, the deck doesn't get to slowly assemble its engines like that. You kind of just need to have them from the get go, because a deck like Boros Convoke doesn't really give the deck time to sort of bounce Slogurk over and over, generate value when it's threatening a clock quite as quick as this, particularly when there's not a Relic of Legends around to sort of cheat that whole engine by just giving you a bunch of mana to let you loop a lot faster.
And we saw there an attack with the Slogger. I think Jason just really trying to get something out of Inti to be able to deal with this board. But this Imudane's Recruiter might be the nail in the coffin. I'm not sure if Jason has anything that can deal with this massive board coming through. And let's see if this is going to be it. A fast win for Boros Convoke.
And this is kind of a prime example of why Boros is such a strong choice in matchups like this, where you really get to pressure this Team of Legends deck on access that other decks don't get to. When you're looking at how this 4-color Legends deck plays against something like mono red, you can have like cut downs early to deal with pressure, and when you're looking at how it plays against controlling decks, you can sort of play this longer, grindy mid-range game. But this is a real strength of Boros Convoke, winning games like this, where you get to be really insulated against one-for-one removal, things like discard, by just having a bunch of redundant cheap pieces of material that generate value, and then you get to apply enough pressure to not really let the Slogurk deck get its grindy late game going.
Yeah, and that was what we saw with a clean 2-0 here for TexasRanger. Now, congratulations on advancing to our semifinals. Congratulations as well to Jason on making yet again another top 8 here at the VML. At this point, I lost count on how many times it has made top 8. It's quite crazy. Now, I have a question for you, Nile. If you were the Boros Convoke deck player, what deck would you be looking for to play in our semifinals? Would you prefer to play from what we saw? So Azorius Control is left, Bant is Toxic is left, Temur lands as well.
I think the only deck I would like to not see out of those would probably be the Toxic list. I think the rest of them I'd feel pretty comfortable getting underneath their game plans and just beating them up before they have a chance to really say anything about it. But Toxic is a deck that really is able to turn that on Convoke's head. So I think that's the deck I'd want to see the least out of those.
So I'm not sure if we have a slide where we can see here our semi-finals, because the semifinals, both semifinals and finals live, and it looks like Phoebe did deliver amazingly here our top 8 bracket. So we had Aspie, Wardle Waker 2, Cleve, Ashley, TexasRanger, Jason, Mythic Michaela, and Nora Martin making top 8. Once again, congratulations to all of you. You did amazing. Congratulations on the regional championship invite, the money that you got, and also the VML champs. A lot of these names well known to the VML, making good results over and over again, and that consistency really paying off. Now, into our top 4 here, we saw World Awaker defeat Aspie, Cliff defeating Ashley. So that's going to be one of our semifinals. Then we just saw TexasRanger defeat Jason, and we have Nora that just won against Mythic Michaela. So I think we are going to see first World Awaker 2 versus Cliff. Can we take a look at our players here? Exactly, our player slide. So starting here with World Waker 2, they were in Division 1, seeded 25, and they are playing Temur Analyst, a deck that personally I've been playing quite a lot. It's a deck that also is going to kind of rotate out with the Streets of New Capena lands rotating. Now, Nile, what do you think of this deck here, the Temur Analyst?
I think Analyst is a very cool deck, and I think it is especially cool that a deck like this can exist and thrive in the standard format. Like, to me, it just feels so unlike what we normally get as far as, top tier decks and standard goes. So I think it's very cool that it exists at all. I think the way that it functions is very interesting. I'm excited to see it be played.
Arya, this deck here in particular saw some changes throughout the time that it has been played in standard. So one of the changes is started playing Bonnie Paul in the sideboard alongside some other cards. What do you think of this list that we are seeing here? A pretty standard list, right? Any card that you think are interesting?
It's a pretty straightforward list, like you said. The Bonnie Pals on the sideboard really help shore up a lot of the weaknesses post board against things like Graveyard Hate. Gonna draw some attention to this. Vampire's Vengeances in the sideboard. World Waker clearly came prepared for things like Convoke and Toxic, where mod feet board wipes are really, really what you want against those decks. And so having those in addition to the ill-timed explosion definitely helps make sure that at least there's some resilience to strategies this deck generally struggles against.
And who is World Waker playing against? Let's take a look here at our other players, which is CliffBoyardee. We have seen Cliff here a lot in the VML. They have been doing very amazing. They started here on Division 4, seeded 5, so a pretty high seed here into our playoffs, and Azorius Control. Now, Nile, what do you feel particularly of Azorius Control versus Temur Analyst? I feel like that's a matchup that we've seen quite a lot over these last months. Who do you think might be favored?
Yeah, so it's hard for me not to have a bias in this decision because I just love blue white control so much. I am in love with the card Deduce, but I do think it's kind of tricky. I think Analyst is really a deck that can fight blue white control in the long game. So I think it's a pretty close matchup. I think if I was going to give the edge to someone, I would give it to Analyst.
Now, Arya, do you think that Cliff is 3 steps ahead here with this Azorius Control deck, or do you also agree with Nile and give the advantage to Temur Analyst?
Yeah, I think it's like Niall said, it's a pretty close matchup. If we look at like the specifics of Cliff Stack, I'd lean a little bit towards Analyst. There's not that much hard counter magic, which is what's really important over the long games, making sure you can actually answer the Analyst deck's top end. Notably, only one Dishana Stidebinder in the main. That's another card that if there may be more copies of, that's really strong against what the deck is doing. So I think it's really close in terms of this specific list, but I imagine the Analyst deck is a little favored.
I'm not sure if we are ready to see our match here. I mean, I'm sure the players are getting ready. Okay, so Phoebe already told me we have a couple of minutes because this match is live. Now, I don't know about you, but I love the finals for this reason. Our last VML broadcast of the season is really interesting because of this live match. Now, Nile, do you think that adds pressure here for our players? Just the fact that they are live and this is being broadcasted.
Oh, absolutely. As someone who's put on a bunch of tournaments and like ran these events from the back end, there are a lot of players who you're like, "Hey, you're table 1 feature match." They're just like, "Do I have to be? Is it okay if I'm not?" And that's reasonable. Like there's, this for a lot of people this added layer of pressure when you know that you're on camera, people are watching. You just feel like extra perceived and like I don't know, people are analyzing what you're doing. And I think that can really get in people's heads. So I think there is definitely an additional layer of pressure to being live on screen here at the feature match of the finals of the VML.
Arya, being in the finals of the VML is something that you are no stranger to since you were a couple of times our VML champion. Do you feel more pressure when you were being broadcasted here live and we saw your matches live, or for you it was the same as every week in the VML?
I'll admit that maybe the first time it was a little bit of pressure, but past a certain point, you kind of get used to it. And I have to imagine that a lot of the players we're going to be seeing here tonight, maybe like a little bit of pressure, but these players are no stranger to competing at this stage, no stranger to winning matches of Magic with a lot on the line. I mean, we saw people like Jason, who recently played in 2 Pro Tour top 8s, an RC top 8, you name it. We see like the match we're watching right now, Cliff. We've seen play on the Pro Tour, play like at the highest level for the highest stakes. So pressure or not, I'm sure the players we're watching will undoubtedly perform tonight.
And I have to say, we cannot close our season 12 without giving massive props to the VML players that have been doing fantastic in a competitive Magic scene overall, like in the Pro Tour, some of them qualifying for the World Championship. It is really nice to see. I mean, me and you, Arya, we are here almost from the beginning in the VML. I think I started playing in season 3. You were even playing maybe before that. And it is insane to see how much the VML has grown. I mean, always the spots are filled for the 828 players, and we see a lot of growth here in the community. Nile, I know that you've been also hosting some events for the community. How does that feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think the VML is really great. The VML is a big reason why I got back into Magic in the level that I did. I think it's a really incredible community and tournament series, and I'm ready to get into this game.
That's very exciting. We have here, we are seeing the site for World Waker playing this Temur Analyst. Now, Arya, what do you feel like this hand? I mean, in Temur Analyst, having a lot of lands usually is not a bad sign.
Yeah, a lot of lands is pretty good, and broadly, it's just really hard to want to mulligan any hand like this in this matchup. Uh, Against a deck like Blue White Control, a lot of your setup is going to get interacted with and countered. It's just about making land drops till you get to that late game, making sure you actually like start resolving those 6, 7, 8 mana spells, and then trying to go over the top of Blue White. So yeah, it's hard to mulligan a hand like this.
I really like that, not recently, but these Fires of Victory is an addition to the deck that is not been there since the beginning. I feel like it's definitely a very interesting card. Now, Nile, what do you think are the key cards that Cliff needs to answer this Temur Analyst deck?
Yeah, so I think that's like really the tricky part of the matchup is really like if World Waker is, in the late game, it becomes a thing where you kind of have to answer all of it, right? Like anything resolving can spell doom for you. Obviously, a World Soul Rage could just end your game on the spot right there. But then, of course, also, a 7 mana deluge is really big. A Virtue Resolving is really big. There's multiple pieces to the engine, with the Nissa and the Analyst that are important. I mean, I think choosing and knowing when and what to counter is a very difficult part of this matchup.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we see here Cliff actually being aggressive with that restless anchorage. Not, I mean, they could just pretend they had like three steps ahead, but just being aggressive. Why do you think that's the choice here, Harya?
So, like Mel said, there's a lot of threats out of the Steamer Analyst deck that are going to, over the course of a long game, take over. And the way the Blue White deck really beats that is you want to be applying a lot of pressure whenever you can, so that you can interact with a few key threats and close out the game, rather than just giving the Team Analyst deck infinite time to close the game out. And turn 3 is a turn where you know there's nothing the Team Analyst deck can be doing that you actually care about. Nissa plus a fetch land isn't possible. You can only either play Nissa or have a fetch land. And then Analyst, if played, is not going to be able to be activated that turn. There's going to be another turn before that happens. So at that point, there's no reason to hold up mana. You might as well apply some pressure.
And we see here World Waker already starting to get some ramp. Nisa plus the lands entering on top is a great combination. And I mean, things looking pretty good here for Temur Analyst. Now, obviously, we don't know what Cliff might have, but what do you think, Niall, of this board state?
I mean, the board state's not bad. Like Nissa is obviously, great, an important part. Spelunking being on the board, very, very fortunate for World Waker. But I think really just the impact of being able to go, turn 4, make my 5th land drop, play a creature who's vital to my plan, and also draw 2 cards. I think that's just a really strong turn 4 here.
One thing about Blue White Control that makes it so strong is that things like Wandering Emperor, Memory Deluge, which allow you, for example, on turn 4 to keep mana open and to you can either counter magic, or if your opponent doesn't play anything, you get to play these spells and gain advantage in instant speed. Now, both those cards are rotating. How much of a loss is that for Blue White area?
I think it's a bit of a loss, but not a loss the way we've seen decks like Slogurk and Analyst suffer, where there's still going to be other tools for these decks to play control and game plans. Ultimately, a lot of the tools in control are at some level interchangeable. You just need to make sure you have your threats, you have your answers, and then what they actually are. The specifics don't matter as much. So I think Blue White will still likely be pretty okay even after that.
And we see here World Waker creating a lot of advantage from the first Aftermath Analyst. We saw two lands. Unfortunately for a World Waker, they were not the sacrifice lands, but now the second Aftermath getting one of those sacrifice lands. And World Waker can just crack that Aftermath Analyst at any time. Now, Nile, how do you choose what is the perfect time to do it, knowing that there's cards like Tishana's Tidebinder?
Yeah, Tidebinder is definitely a card that you need to respect, but I think part of it is also determining when you have something to do with all of that mana that matters or feels important. And I think it's actually really nice having the two analysts here, because you kind of get some redundancy in that decision.
And look at all this value because of that. I mean, there was a get loss to Nisa, but at this point, look at how many lands World Waker has. And this is just a dream because they can now start assessing multiple threats a turn. And we know that Blue White Control is not great at dealing with multiple threats. They might have the first counter, but then it starts getting more and more difficult. What do you think of this board here, Arya?
Yeah, this game is looking pretty close to over with the Temur deck being really massively favored at this point. I mean, honestly, once that first Nissa trigger resolved and got an analyst for World Waker, they were just tremendously ahead in this game. The blue white deck really needs to be applying pressure of some sort because once you get to a board state like this for analyst, the main problem that comes up is just all of the deck is threats. Memory Deluge, things like World Soul's Rage all threaten to end the game on their own. And the deck's now got enough mana that's not really ever going to run out of things to do. So it's hard to imagine the blue-white deck coming back from a spot like this.
And we see here some math from World Waker's side. Cliff did use the No More Lies to counter that memory deluge. Now, two mana available, but one of them is Myrex with Colorless. That means no more lies. We know that 3 steps ahead costs 3 mana. This gives a window here for World Waker to try to close out this game. There's a Virtue, there's Nissa. Do we have a way to close this game now?
I think it's unlikely that the game will actually end this turn, but it's pretty functionally over once a virtue has resolved, and there's all this late game value that World Waker has accrued.
And we see here that Nissa entering the battlefield, and these lands also entering on top, giving so much advantage to World Waker. And at this point, Cliff must be just thinking about the next game and what to do next. One thing that I really like about this analyst deck is that Timed Explosion as a board wipe is really good against non-aggro decks, because while cards like Sunfall or Farewell might not be great against decks that don't play creatures, at least with Timed Explosion you can just draw the cards and choose to not discard, which it's a very nice card. Do you think this card will see standard post the rotation? Because right now Temur Analyst, as we discussed, is not going to be viable in standard anymore. Is there a place for Timed Explosion?
I have to imagine there'll be a space fail timed explosion for pretty much all of its standard existence. It's a pretty unique spell in terms of being a modal board wipe or card draw. We don't really do that a lot because it's a pretty risky card to do and has like really high upside if you build your deck around it. Just decks that effectively can use cards and in a long game like Analyst, where you're critical mass deck, in those decks, something like Ill-Timed Explosion just provides a lot of value as a board wipe that has a really low opportunity cost of including in your deck. And I imagine there'll be various spells decks that require a critical mass of cards that exist over the existence of standard. So I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon.
So very interesting thing happened here where that World Soul Rage going for a 12. Now these lands are not providing other lands anymore. There's no basics left in World Waker's side. So now how do we close out this game, Nile?
Well, at this point, it is basically just there's so many ways. We've got this deluge in the yard, which can draw us into something that wins us the game. I mean, kind of like Arya said earlier, I don't know if we're actually going to close it out this turn, but we're certainly putting the game into such a position where there's probably just no coming back from it. I mean, we have all of our lands on the field, so everything that we draw is just gas. Uh, I mean, we're about to make so much mana that we probably are just winning the game here. But everything we draw is good for us, and a lot of our cards that don't kill you draw into the cards that kill you. So, I mean, any deluge into another World Soul Rage will uh, clean it up pretty easily.
This is an open deck list tournament, so we know there's no Jace on Cliff's deck, but that's a card that usually is able to finish with the Temur Analyst because at 53 life, it's not going to be easy to even come back from that situation. But Jace, just the ability to mill, can sometimes be a win con as well in these blue-white control decks.
Yeah, it looks like we did find the World Soul Rage. As you mentioned, it is open deck list, so World Waker does know that there's nothing in Cliff's deck that can counter spells right now with the 2 mana up, with one of them being colorless.
So we have that deluge there, probably looking for something maybe like a 3 steps ahead, just a way to counter what World Waker is doing next. We know that there's a World Soul Rage, so as you said, this game might be close to be over with World Waker here now having access to a lot of mana. And another card that I really love, it's this one that I swear I cannot pronounce for the life of me. Shigeki? Is that how you say it? Probably not. But this is a very nice card because there was a time where you just ran out of your World Soul Rage for some reason you didn't have anymore, and now this allows you to get that card back from the grave alongside other ones. So we have 3 steps ahead, and now we know that the board is clear for that World Soul Rage.
Yeah, and with all of our lands tapping for 3, it's very easy to make that mana. Congratulations to World Waker for taking game 1 there.
Yeah, very good game. Now, Arya, what do you think is going here on the sideboard for World Waker?
Yeah, so this is exactly what we talked about beforehand with how this deck wins post-board games, where you have pivot threats like Bonnie Paul. So post-board, from a blue-white deck, you might expect to see something like Rest in Peace, which is 1 copy of that in Cliff's deck, Tishana's Tidebinder to counter Analyst triggers, just a lot of interaction for the Analyst engine. And what the Analyst deck wants to do is post-board morph into just this ramp deck with a ton of big spells. So you're going to try and play out your first few turns, whether whatever interaction your opponent has, and just try and get to a point where you're playing things like Bonnie Paul, you're playing your 6, 7, 8 drops turn over turn and just running the blue-white deck out of answers for threats like that. And you want to get rid of dead cards like Fires of Victory, Ill-Timed Explosion that are maybe not really doing what you want in this matchup for those extra late-game threats.
And we saw there Phoebe for a second. Shout out to Phoebe, our amazing producer. Without Phoebe, we could not be here making this show. So big shout out to Phoebe for always being here. So now World Awaker will be on the draw, Cliff will be on the play. Again, we are seeing things from World Waker perspective, which I think it's actually very interesting because against blue white control is always nice to have this element of surprise. Like, do they have the counter? Do they not? Nile, what do you think of this opener here for World Waker?
Yeah, I mean, we've got lands, we've got spells. I really like putting back the World Souls Rage. That is a card for later. We're gonna shuffle our deck a ton anyway. I think it's very safe to just send back. And now we have a lot of options where we can, hold up negate, play our analyst, play half of the virtue. But into that open mana, I really like just holding up negate here.
And looks like holding up negate as well because I mean one thing about No More Lies is that also exiles a card, right? So in
Mhm.
this case, even if World Waker played the Aftermath with the idea of even if it gets countered to virtue it late, it's not possible with No More Lies.
Yeah, and one of the reasons you might see World Waker like playing it a little slow is specifically because of that plan we talked about to just go into being a late game ramp deck, where No More Lies something that might be relevant now, but if World Waker just plays it really slow, make sure there's no pressure applied from the blue white deck, make sure not to play into something like Tidebinders with a fetch land last turn, then eventually those No More Lies will just not be relevant anymore, and you can kind of overwhelm the blue white deck with your late game threats at that point.
And it looks like patience really paying off here. There's the No More Lies, but a negate in answer. Now, I'm not sure if sideboard there is any counter magic that can deal with that, but I don't think so. And we just draw there from the clue, and 3 cards go to the graveyard. I think only one land though.
There is one negate in Cliff's sideboard. I don't know if he's bringing it in or not, but technically speaking, one colorless, one blue could counter something here, but
Yeah, the knowledge that there's exactly one copy of negate is pretty useful too. Where if it weren't open decklist, you might want to play a little more carefully in that spot, since the chances of your opponent having negate pretty decent, given they've been sculpting their hand a little bit, haven't played spells yet. But in an open decklist format where there's exactly one copy of negate, it's much more reasonable to just make them have it.
And
or
I still
Arya, is it the open deck list does psychic damage, knowing that there's a possible negate that could be anywhere at any time?
That's true, and we see here the blue-white control playing a lot of 1 and 2 offs, which exactly as Niall said, it messes with your opponent's head. Like, do they have it? Do they don't? Ooh, Tishana's Tidebinder there on the trigger of the Aftermath Analyst. That's huge here for Cliff.
Yeah, though it does work out quite well with the second Aftermath Analyst. We're seeing exactly that patience from World Waker that we've talked about that has been working out so well for them this whole game. Where if you bait out the Deshana Sidebinder on the first Analyst, then you can force Cliff to have yet another Deshana Sidebinder, which again, there's only 3 copies total, so not that likely. And the second Analyst is, of course, going to be better than the first one because there's 3 extra cards milled, there's more lands put in the graveyard, so you really get to kind of put this squeeze on the blue-white deck and leave Cliff in a pretty awkward spot.
I
Yeah,
think the graphic we were looking at for Cliff's deck earlier might have been a little askew, because I believe there are actually 4 Tidebinders total. I'm seeing 2 in the main deck and 2 in the side here. I definitely think you have to make them have it, but I do think it's also pretty relevant that there are 4 of them for this matchup.
yeah, that can definitely influence the outcome of the game here, and we will know now. Isn't there any? Okay, maybe the
Oh.
clue leaving us in the edge of this seat because this trigger resolving is huge, right? I mean, there's 3
Mhm.
lands. It doesn't seem maybe like much. I think there's more, right? There were more that are just basics. But look at this mana now available from World Waker.
Yeah, I will say, as someone who plays blue-white control a lot, one of my favorite things to do in a position like this is already have the Tidebinder in hand, but then draw my card with the trigger on the stack to make them think I drew it off the top, and just it just feels worse. It just gets under their skin a little bit. Really, really tilt them before our next game.
Nile, that's evil. I love it. That's exactly what I would expect from a blue-eyed control player, and I gotta say, it's amazing. Now, Arya, what do you think World Waker wants to draw here? Maybe something like Memory Deluge to get access to more cards, because it looks like with only access to 2 cards in hand and a land, there's not really a lot of cards to apply pressure.
Yeah, Memory Deluge would be nice, really just something to leverage that mana and turn it into threats. I do want to draw attention to the fact that there was a Titan of Industry milled off of one of those copies of Aftermath Analyst. So even without something like a Deluge, we could see a Virtue for that Titan, and the Titan get cast with Negate backup, and that seems pretty threatening as well.
And looks like World Waker is thinking exactly the same way as you do. They say great minds think alike. Here, considering the options, maybe checking for the mana if it is enough to do everything and keep that negate up. So it looks like they are going for it.
And I believe
Important.
there's exactly enough mana to leave the negate up, or an additional mana if you want to not have Echoing Deep's Echo enter as a copy of something to play around and normalize on top of that.
Oh, that's really smart, actually. I didn't even consider that you could do that. Every time I play the Echoing Deeps, I have it tapped. So, very good play there. And it looks like choosing to create a 4/4 and put a shield counter. Now, shield doesn't do much against cards like Sunfall, Farewell. Do you think that Cliff does keep those cards post sideboard?
I think there's probably some copies of those cards kept. You can't have too many cards really that are like slow and clunky. You need to be able to be a little mean, a little lean post pod to keep up with these analyst decks. You need to make sure that you have some amount of card flow. You're kind of just playing them on nimble game in these post pod games. But notably, something like Get Lost is something we'd likely still see in from Cliff Postbod, and that's going to be pretty. And Shield Count is pretty useful against that, and even against Farewell or Sunfall. Like we said, there's like some copies of those going to be in, not that many copies, and with a negate to back it up, you're much less afraid of those expensive 5 and 6 mana spells than you are of something like a Get Lost plus another piece of interaction on top of that.
And ooh, that's also a good pickup here. Time the explosion for World Waker. That is a good place to be if you're World Waker, with applying pressure now with that Titan of Industry, having counter magic and card draw with timed explosion. Nile, if you've played this blue-eyed control deck quite a lot, what do you think Leaf needs here to get into the game?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. You really like we're in that stage of the game where you kind of don't want to let anything resolve for the analyst deck, but you are probably also at a point where it is hard to really stop them just because their mana has become so abundant that your, soft permission spells aren't really cutting it. You don't really have that many hard permission spells like 3 steps ahead. Um, Emperor pretty decent here. I think the big thing for Cliff right now is not letting this virtue resolve, and this is a very interesting position for World Waker to be in.
Yeah, very interesting here to choose to deploy that No More Lies, knowing that it probably will not counter effectively anything else in the game with so much mana open. So really trying to make sure that World Waker has the least amount of mana possible after these virtue.
Yeah, definitely good for choking them on mana this turn.
And leaving them
Also,
with no mana for negate.
yeah, and I mean, we did have the possibility of finding a second piece of counter magic off of the deluge there, which doesn't look like we did. But I mean, as you said, no negate mana open.
Oh, but there's never mind. There's three. I my mind was
Oh,
there's
right,
here
it
three.
does count as
Yeah,
3.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
does.
the what something like this does is it lets Cliff maybe try and set up a hand with something like Farewell to clear the board, and then some sort of counterspell, ideally to back it up to force it through really through this negate that's been kind of face up this whole game with the way World Wake has left their mana up.
And this was huge here. The farewell resolving exiled even the enchantment as well. So no more virtue, and now Cliff with a lot of cards in hand, and World Waker only with 2 cards left.
Yeah, only 2 cards left, but notably they do both draw cards, and it has already drawn into more card draw, into getting a virtue back. I mean, this is what makes, I think, the end game of this matchup very tricky. Is even when you are able to answer all these things, you have to keep answering them over and over and over. And Analyst is really good at getting all of the lands out of their deck, so that everything they're drawing is just stuff that you have to be answering.
Yeah, that's a great point. This deck works very good. Ooh, I love this card.
Oh, Tyrannix Rex.
Yes, it is
Oh,
so nice
so
against
good.
control. And we are
Devastating card.
And this really shows like how the analyst deck does such a great job of leveraging that all of its leveraging the fact that once you get into a late game, you're going to have a lot more mana than your opponent. Where at the end of the day, both of these decks are kind of playing the same game. They're leaning on Memory Deluge to provide a bunch of card advantage, and then have some like small ball card advantage on top of that. But when you have this mana advantage that the Analyst deck has gotten, it just becomes really, really hard to keep up with that in the late game, where you can reliably cast and flashback your Memory Deluges in the same turn. You just get to go through your deck in a way this blue-white deck doesn't. Cliff is going to be more constrained on when they can actually flashback these deluges, when they can actually get all those cards in potential their card advantage spells represent.
and we see there the get loss, and very smart World Awaker is like, okay, pay your word first, and then I'll see what I'll do. Uh, and effectively using the gate now on that get lost, we might see 3 steps ahead.
And this looks kind of bad for World Waker, but is actually kind of perfect because there's only 4 hard counter spells in all of Cliff's deck, 5 with negate, and Cliff gets to force through an extra one of them on a negate, which is a card that essentially doesn't matter in some ways when World Waker just gets to recur their threat, get their Tyrannosaurus Rex back by not having it die to exile removal, and then they have Shigeki to recur Virtue again. So that's going to be another Tyrannosaurus Rex in potential if this one gets answered, and then they get a Virtue back and they get to present a Tyrannosaurus Rex again. So there's way more threats represented in World Waker's hand than Cliff can actually answer, unless Cliff presents some exile removal, which they're no longer able to do after having to spend that 3 steps ahead on a spell that you'd really much rather be exiling than hard countering.
Yeah, and exactly as you said, I feel like this deck does do a great job at presenting threats and getting 2-for-1s, getting things back from the graveyard. And here, making Cliff act to use this Memory Deluge flashback main here in their turn. So things looking quite interesting. Now, Nile, I know you love Blue Eyed, but do you feel like things are turning south here for our Blue Eyed control player? I mean, still there's no
Oh, I
lethal
think
attack.
I think things are very, very dire for our hero Blue White control. This this creature is just so devastating. Like you can't counter it. It's extremely hard to interact with. It's going to kill you through any life gain if that's like some weird sub plan you've got going on. Uh, it's it is very scary.
And we see here 9 damage coming through with 4 poison counter, leaving Cliff at 3 life. I mean, not yet, but we know there's the word for, so no card that can deal with that. Now, Arya, do we need a card in white or blue that it's like destroy, it cannot be countered, like to prevent these ward costs?
I think what is actually a really important part of Tyrant Extracts and a really important card, a really important of cards of this genre, a really good thing to be able to build in so that you have counterplay to these more controlling strategies. So I think it's better to leave what is something that has some amount of strength in situations like this, force the more controlling decks to maybe have to trade evenly on mana or down on mana to deal with a threat like this rather than just being able to trade up with it with really cheap interaction.
Yeah, I do really like cards like these that cannot be countered. They cannot be, for example, Trun is another example of a green card that is really good against blue white because it cannot be targeted by non-green
Mm.
spells.
Mhm.
So I really like that the decks have this ability to kind of dodge a bit of blue white or have some good cards against blue white as well. And I mean, there's not a lot of things left for Cliff to do, uh, because they need to deal with that dinosaur, and also potentially, like, if World Waker here can find a World Soul Rage, deal with World Soul Rage as well. And as Arya, you said earlier on, Cliff already used a lot of the counter magic available in their deck.
Yeah, having to pay for ward on the Tyrant extracts here is a real kind of squeeze that Worldwick is applying in this spot where Cliff just can't interact with everything Worldwick is doing. The Tyrant Rex is eating at least 6 mana if it gets get losted, and maybe 8 mana if it gets Wandering Emperor. So Cliff can at most have one more piece of interaction for something like a card draw spell or a threat, and at that point Worldwick is going to get to force through a second threat.
Oh, there is a march there. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Cliff runs 4 Wandering Emperors in the deck, and we have seen 0 in both matches.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I believe you are correct, but I think it's also entirely possible that that is a card Cliff would be looking to trim or maybe even cut in this matchup.
yeah. Part of it is also that there needs to be a good spot for Cliff to run something like that out. So while this game, if Cliff had it in hand, it's quite likely they would have played it. Game one, I would have assumed that a Wandering Emperor would actually just not have really had a good chance to be played because Cliff was kind of always on the back.
And we see here that Memory Deluge. Now, I'm okay, so there it is, World Soul Rage. I was curious to know if there's a World Soul Rage in the graveyard, but I don't think so. Otherwise, we would have seen the Shigeki there. World Soul Rage dealing now. I mean, there's only 1 mana available. We know that Cliff does not have Spell Pierce. And even if they did, I feel like here there's plenty of mana available with their Virtue.
Mhm.
I love this love emote here from Cleve. And that's it. I mean, 2-0 here for World Waker. Congratulations on making it into the VML finals. Our first finalist of the day. Congratulations with Temur Analyst advancing. Congrats as well to Cleve for making it into our top 8 and playing so well. I mean, I think they played beautiful here, Blue White Control. Just a tough matchup. And a lot of what I've experienced personally when playing Analyst versus Blue White ends up happening. But overall, great games here from both players. Arya, anything that you want to take away from the games we saw here from these players?
I mean, really a testament to the strength of this analyst deck and the resilience it has. A lot of decks in the past, you see these ramp combo decks kind of, and they fold to a piece of interaction or two. But really speaks to the strength of this innovative strategy the deck had of just filling your sideboard up with maybe counter magic and pivot threats like Bonnie Paul. And that really makes the whole game plan of trying to interact with combo pieces or have hate pieces work a lot less well post board, and really gives this analyst deck a lot more legs than similar combo ramp decks have had in the past.
Nile, what about you? Any highlights or takeaways from the games here that we saw in these first semifinals of the day?
Yeah, I mean, as we kind of talked about going into the match, the thing that the analyst deck has over blue white control in this matchup is that they can actually hang in the late game. Like that's really where blue white wants to take its opponents and where it really thrives. But whenever you are able to just keep producing these threats over and over and over, and you're able to produce more threats than they can actually answer, it ends up making blue white look weak in their strongest element, which is the late game. And I think we saw excellent play from both of our players tonight. And congratulations once again to Worldwaker.
And let's take a look here at our players slide for our second semifinals of the day, which should be much more explosive. So we have here the top 8 bracket, Worldwaker here making it as our first finalist. Now we're going to watch TexasRanger MTG versus Nora. As I said, a bit more explosive and aggressive. TexasRanger with Boros Convoke. And Arya, we saw this deck before. Anything that you want to highlight about it, or how you feel positioning, knowing that it's going against Bant Poison?
Yeah, so I really like this deck spot going into the Bant deck. It's the Toxic deck is kind of a almost Delver style deck where you want to play cheap threats and interact a little bit what your opponent's doing and just get in under these big mid range and control decks. And Boros kind of plays around a lot of that. The deck has a lot of blockers early for the toxic creatures, and it's just really hard to get ahead of early on board. So going into toxic, that's pretty much perfect for Boros. I mean, a large part of why toxic lost its metagame share was specifically because of Boros lining up really well into it. So I'm pretty happy in TexasRanger spot, and you just want to make sure that you have an early explosive start, don't fall behind against the toxic decks early game, and then you're in a pretty good spot.
So let's take a look here at who TexasRanger MTG is facing today. So it's Nora. Nora is no stranger to the VML. They have been doing amazing in the VML overall. Division 13, Seed 2, so a great seed to be at. And playing here Band Toxic. Nile, how do you feel about this deck? It's the first time that we're going to see it here today.
Yeah, I mean, I am a big fan of the Bant Toxic deck. I think it is really cool that kind of all of the sudden you know, poison deck became successful in standard. Um, I really, really like the sort of explosive power of being able to go like Skrelv into Jawbone Duelist or Rot Priest into any other card in your deck. And, just those sorts of like kill you out of nowhere turns that this deck is able to put together. So I am excited to see it play against, what is probably the strongest aggro deck in standard and see how this turns out.
So let's see here as our players get ready. I was casting actually the regional championships, and this was one of the decks that performed really well and had one of the best conversions from day one into day two. And all the Band Toxic players that I talked to, they were like, I'm good against Azorius control, Temur Analyst, all these control-ish decks. I just want to dodge the Boros Convoke. That's it. So they felt pretty unfavored in this matchup, but let's see if that's the case or not. As you said, Nile, Ben Toxic is a very strong deck. Phoebe, I'm not sure if our players are ready here since we are going to have. Yeah, so looks like very soon we are going to be ready to watch this match. So definitely very interesting and a very different type of game from what we saw here between Temur Analyst and Azorius Control. Now, I'm going to ask you because Arya, we already know our first finalist is Temur Analyst. Who do you think that TexasRanger is hoping to win this match? So if you were the Temur Analyst deck, who would you like to face the most? Boros Convoke or uh, the Ban Toxic deck?
I think I'd rather face the Boros deck than the Bant deck in a spot like this, particularly given Nora's a higher seed, would be on the play if she got to the finals. I wouldn't want to play against Toxic on the draw. The deck's really set up to play against these late game decks, and Boros Convoke also a pretty tough matchup for Analyst, but at the very least, the Boros deck has this vulnerability to sweep us both spot that maybe the Temur deck can leverage.
Yeah, and we see here already our players getting started, and Jawball Duelist, a very key card for our not Boros, for our Ban Toxic deck. Now, Nile, what do you feel about this hand here from TexasRanger?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are seeing pretty strong hands from both players here. Both hands really like doing a lot of what their decks want to be doing. Now, you need to have something to block the duelist, and you're pretty much locked into having two different colored creatures to do so because we have the Skrelv on board. Uh, so it looks like TexasRanger here might be considering keeping 3 reinforcements up, which I think I like a good deal.
Yeah, and this deck is great at going wide, and also like this flash interaction with the reinforcements is pretty nice against Ban Toxic. Now there's that fading orb that can actually be very interesting here if TexasRanger decides to block.
Yeah, what I really like for Nora in this spot is this is pretty close to the ideal assertive curve she can have against Boros, where the Skrelv Jawbone Duelist is just representing a lot of points of poison really quickly, and Jawbone Duelist being a double striker means there's not really good blocks for Texas Ranger if Nora chooses to Skrelv the Jawbone Duelist. Though without a Skrelv on the Jawbone Duelist, uh, something like a double block could have been threatening. Though I believe that's it's hard to tell from here, but I believe that's a copy of the seed core that Nora has up, which means really just any block on this Jawbone Duelist is completely untenable out of this Boros deck.
So
Yeah,
the good news is that first of all, that Duelist does not have trample. Second of all, that Skrelv can only give protection from one color, and this Boros Convoke does a good job of assessing different threats with different colors. But now we saw that fading up, and how explosive can be this toxic turn next here.
yeah, this could be a very big turn here for Nora. I mean, you know that TexasRanger here is, all tapped out, shielded down. You can get Jawbone Duelist in through the Defender and get 4 points of poison on, which is turning on Corrupted for our seed cores, for a lot of the cards in our deck. And we still have the Rot Priest here, which at any point could represent more poison going directly to you. So, I mean, getting your opponent 40% of the way there are very powerful.
Yeah, and I feel like Nora needs something like the Blue March that allows you to start getting a lot of poison counters from the maybe Rot Priest here. And great turn for TexasRanger with that Glyphal Demolition and Warleader's Call just working so beautifully together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really able to kind of maintain pace with what Nora has done in terms of toxic and establish such a strong board as to make it pretty difficult for her to be able to fight through or come back from this.
And we see there, ooh, Knight just failing here to find something, which is not common, especially when using 4 creatures to convoke it. Now, very important is that Texas made sure that they have a red creature and 2 white creatures. This meaning that even with that Skrelv protection, they will be able to block.
Yeah, I think this was the last turn for Nora to really draw that blue much. I believe it would have been, I think, exactly lethal in this spot. It was one out, kind of, and part of the way this deck has its late game strength is you have draws like that. But given that that's no longer an opportunity, it's looking pretty over. Where I doubt Nora's going to be in a spot to kind of survive another turn from TexasRanger without losing the threat of lethal through just losing blockers.
Yeah, and it looks like here Texas Ranger did not draw any creature, but there's still that blood token. There's still that Myrex as well that is able to make 1 creature deal 1 damage there. Uh, I'm not great at combat math, but it seems pretty close to be over.
Yeah, it's notably not quite there. There's only 10 points from Texas Ranger in a spot like this, where if they attack with all their creatures, we'd see blocks on the Warden of the Inner Sky and the Knight with the Duelist and the Rot Priest, and then there'd be a potentially scary crackback from Nora Martin in a spot like this. If Texas Ranger were to attack with all their creatures, they kind of price into a smaller attack. But what this means is the attack next turn is almost certainly going to be lethal.
Yeah, and we see there, right there, I mean, forcing Nora to do some blocks that Skrelv cannot block. Uh, the Duelist does have that seed core, as you said, that does allow to get a good turn. Still a bit off, but I mean, 5 life is not.
Oh,
Ooh, wait a second. Is this?
so so this is, I think, just one mana off of being lethal. I'm seeing 9 points of poison here, given that Botanical Sanctum is tapped. So yeah, if there was one
Wow.
fewer blocker, we might have been able to see lethal here. Actually, there might still be lethal, where the Skrull can give the Jawbone Duelist pro red, and then the March can target Venerated Rotpriest Skrelv and the 2 white blockers, getting 2 more points of poison. Then the Jawbone Duelist gets in for the final 4 points for exactly lethal here.
Wow.
Wow, that is an intense line. We'll see if Nora is able to spot it. I mean, we've got the start of it.
And Arya, that's why you are a two-time, right, VML champion, and I am not, because I could not see this line that far and that just fast like you did. That's impressive, I must say.
Yeah, and I mean, at a different stage, there might be concerns over like whether the player's gonna see it, but I mean, Nora's got to the spot by playing absolute up there with the best in the world, and so it's pretty clear that in a spot like this, she's played the deck a lot. She's a really strong player. She's gonna find a line. I never doubted for a second.
Wow, great play there by Nora. She did amazing, even with the pressure of being live, finding that line. Very well done. Now, we do have a sideboard here. Nile, what do you think the Boros Convoke deck might bring against the Bant Toxic?
Yeah, so I mean, Lithomatic Barrage, quite nice. Deals with a lot of the problematic creatures pretty cleanly. Um, I don't think there is a whole. I mean, really, I think you just need to deal with a couple of the creatures that really matter, and that seems to be the plan here for Texas Ranger.
Wow, I'm still impressed. I thought the Boros Convoke deck was just winning next turn, and that top deck was incredible. And also seeing that line, I'm still thinking about it. But okay, we are moving on into game 2 now with Texas Ranger on the play. Arya, how do you feel about this opening end for Texas Ranger?
This opening hand's quite good. There's just a pretty clean turn 1 into turn 2 with Warden and Resolute reinforcements. And what's really important is having a piece of interaction for that first threat out of Toxic if possible. We saw how that Scrove plus Jawbone Duelist kind of snowballed and took over the game. And you really want to be able to answer the first threat to make sure that doesn't happen. So something like Lithomantic Barrage in the spot, just excellent and exactly what TexasRanger wants to see in their opening hand.
And Nile, we see that Nora brought Spell Pierce. Why do you think she brings this card against the Convoke deck?
Yeah, I mean, again, we are open deck list here. So, Nora is privy to everything that is in the list here, but, Gleeful Demolition is a problem. The War Leader's Call, as we're seeing it be pierced right now, is a problem. I think those two cards are reason enough, especially when you are on the draw against Convoke. Spell Pierce can be like one of your only outs to stopping their like Pioneer draw.
And it looks like we see the World Leaders Call, and now a sideboard card here for Boros Convoke this time. Lithuanic Barrage, really good here to bring back that World Leaders Call. And I mean, Texas Rangers slowly but surely applying some pressure.
Yeah, this is kind of exactly what you want to see from the Boros Convoke side of the matchup, aside from the lack of threats left. You really just want to be playing a slow game, uh, applying pressure, have the toxic side playing a slow game, and get to the point where you're at a spot like this, applying a bunch of pressure to Nora's life total, while at the same time not having taken a single point of toxic.
Yeah, so it looks really good here for Texas Ranger as they are now applying more pressure, but needing to draw something to get advantage. Now, this is a good card to draw. It not only is a body, deals damage from the War Leader's Call, also makes you a clue. Ooh, Knockout Blow, another card from sideboard that also gains life.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
really love Knockout Blow here. Especially just using it now, like makes decent enough use of your mana, get something off the board, gives you a little bit more time to try to have an explosive poison turn.
Ooh,
Ooh.
speaking of explosive turns, this card is, it can do a lot of things, right? Next turn, being able to uh, pump the old team, especially with their War Leader's Call into play.
Yeah, we also have the other side of Imidanes available at this point in the game. Or if we wanted to, we could just make a couple of knights and that alone does a couple points of damage.
So here, very interesting. Nora deciding to attack using that Skrelv to start dealing some poison. Now, obviously, this is going to be game. Now, Arya, how do you think that this deck suffers from its own mana base, the Bant Toxic? Because we saw there the Rot Priest not being able to get cast. We know that this deck does have some mana issues.
Yeah, I think it's something the deck has struggled with quite a bit in its existence in standard. And just one of the problems with playing a deck like this, like aggro decks that are low to the ground, aggro decks that 3 or more colors really struggle because you want to be able to not just play out all your cards, but play them out on curve, not having any tap lands. Luckily for Nora, the deck's mana base has gotten a lot better recently. So notably, Botanical Sanctum out of OTJ, making for the deck to be able to play a lot of fast lands, I think helps a lot with the issues this deck previously had. So I'd say the mana is at least playable now, but there still are going to be games like that where you run into issues. And that's ultimately always going to be the case with 3 color aggressive decks, regardless of what format you're playing.
And it looks like Texas Ranger did mull to 5, putting a War Leader's Call and a Gleeful Demolition into the bottom, not being able to cast either of those right now, having no access to red mana except with that Cavern of Souls. Nile, how do you feel about Nora's hand here, our Ben Toxic player?
I feel a lot better about it after drawing the March. In general, I think it is a fine hand, if not. I don't think either player really drew like exactly what they need or want. I think both of these hands are just like kind of decent, like good enough, and they both sort of have cards you can draw into that turn them into just fine hands, and then into great hands, which the March is definitely part of that for Nora.
Very interesting here as well, because TexasRanger are really close to having something explosive if they do draw a red source with that recruiter. That there's also the barrage that really helps against this annex entry. Ooh, that's
Ooh,
difficult.
that is tough. That is very tough.
Yeah, here we're gonna get to see a little bit of how Mulligan shaped like a matchup like this, where normally it's really important for the Bant Toxic deck to like get a lot of poison in early, be applying pressure early. But in a post-board game like this, where both decks kind of veer a little more mid-rangey, and there's a Mulligan from the Boros side, the Bant Toxic deck kind of gets to like play a slightly slower game, set up, and then hope to eventually win with something like multiple copies of Rot Priest and March of Swirling Mist.
Yeah, devastating little combo here.
Yeah, I mean, the second Rod Priest is amazing. And one thing that Ban Poison does have is that the opponent only has 10 life, right? And it cannot gain life.
Yes, that is that is certainly a big benefit to these toxic lists.
Now, this is going to be quite a bit of damage, but we know about that March, that Fading Hope. Even the knockout blow, so a lot of ways to deal with creatures here.
Yeah, I mean, really shaping up to be quite the turn for Nora.
And this is a spot where we might see Nora even just bounce her own venerated Rot Priest and try and sort of combo kill in a spot like this. Where what she's looking to do at this point is not even interact, not even engage in combat at all, or at least not use that as a way to win the game, and instead just win with venerated Rot Priest triggers. So we saw the Rot Priest get bounced there, and then what we're gonna see Nora try and set up to do is play a charge of the mites, hopefully not die this turn, and then next turn try and win with March hitting her entire board or close to her entire board to just give TexasRanger a bunch of poison counters out of nowhere.
And here TexasRanger has to choose because of the mana situation, either to play that War Leader's Call or the Gleeful Demolition. I'm sure they would be thrilled to do both, but the mana will not allow it. Now, what do we see here from Nora?
So I believe this might be pretty close to lethal again for Nora, where what she can do is block with her Rot Priest and then phase them out with March. So that gets TexasRanger up to 7 poison, and then attack with the Rot Priest for another 2 poison, up to 9. And then all she needs to do is target one of her creatures, and that'll be lethal.
Looks like we are going to start with the knockout blow here, gaining some life as well. And now March will be just for 1.
Yeah, now that we've cast knockout blow.
Yeah, the advantage of taking something of a safer line here is the Painlands on Nora's side of the battlefield, I think, might have made that lethal even with the blocks from her. So it makes sense to play it a little more conservatively, in particular play around something like a Voldaren Epicure or another creature from TexasRanger that could potentially have represented damage with the War Leader's Call post combat.
And
This,
here,
however, should be lethal. Just targeting her own things twice with Fading Hope and then March to get 6 more points of poison off the Venerated Rot Race.
and again, like going very long life because these pain lands really are uh, killing it. And I mean, life is a resource. Oh, going to zero from the pain lands.
Yeah, I think we only had ways to get up to 9 poison there. Not
Yeah,
100% sure.
the Tran portal always causing life loss and a lack of blue mana was the issue there. Filipa, you called out the mana issues for this deck, and yeah, the Tran portal means the Tran portal always representing damage and being on white means it's not actually a way of generating 2 blue pips and 4 total mana without going to zero off your lands.
Very close game here for a matchup that usually is well favored for Boros Convoke that did end up winning, but on a very, very close one. So, congratulations here to TexasRanger on advancing. Also, Nora, shout out for doing once again amazing. I've seen your name on the tops of the VML for some time now, so congratulations. Playing it beautifully, that Bant toxic deck. I really love that play, Arya, that you saw ahead and that Nora just went for it and won game one with it. So very good things here. Now we are going to have a final between World Waker with Temur Lands versus TexasRangers Boros Convoke. Let's take a look here at our players' profile. Starting with TexasRanger, I mean, again, we've seen here the games from them. How do you think this Boros Convoke does against Temur Analyst, Nile?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a matchup that, as the Convoke player, you're probably feeling pretty good going into. You know, Analyst is a deck that, while extremely powerful and versatile, is not very quick at doing those things. And so I think, there are a lot of draws for Convoke that can just get under there and close the game out before you have a chance to even start doing what you're trying to do.
And let's take a look here at our Boros Temur Analyst deck here from World Waker. Now, Arya, do you think there's some cards here on the sideboard or main that can be good against the Boros Convoke deck?
Yeah, very much so. So while this match is far from a foregone conclusion or even any game, like Nal said, Burrow's pretty favored, particularly game one, with the way it can get under this analyst deck. It just applies a lot of pressure and goes really wide in a way that the analyst deck sort of struggles against. Analyst gains a lot of incidental life off of its gain lands, so slightly better position against some other aggro decks where they're better at counting to exactly 20. Boros is very good at getting you to 20, and then the next turn getting you for 20 damage, and next turn getting you for another 15 damage because you're going to go wide again, having follow-up recruiters, have follow-up wall eater skulls, just represent damage turn over turn in a way that Analyst struggles with. Whereas Vampire's Vengeance, whereas game one, Team Analyst is going to struggle against that. Post board, Vampire's Vengeance is a card that I'd really be looking to in this matchup to maybe try and even things out a little. Where game two and three, that a cheap sweeper, particularly an instant speed one, can do a lot against Convoke. And once you start going with multiple sweepers, like something like Vengeance into All Timed Explosion, it gets really hard for Convoke to build up turn over turn through multiple board wipes. So I'd be looking to post board games in particular for World Waker to try and maybe come back in what's normally a pretty tough matchup.
And I have to say, we had 11 weeks of the VML season 12, 2 players remaining out of 128 competitors. It all comes to this. So let's get ready for our final match of the season, which is insane to even say. I always say this, but season 12 flew by. Now, I'm excited for season 13 because we are going to have a standard rotation for the first time in 2 years. Nile, are you excited for the standard rotation and to see what standard will look like after this?
Yeah, I mean, I think Standard has been in a really good spot for a really long time. I've been singing its praises for years. I think it is just a real testament to how well these sets are designed that, even with the expanded rotation lifespan, it is still playing together so nicely and making such a fun and diverse format. That being said, I am ready for the card Rafine to go away. I'm ready for the channel lands to go away. There's a lot of cards that like I think are very cool and very well designed, but I am just kind of sick of seeing. So I'm very excited for post rotation standard.
What about you, Arya? Yes, Phoebe? What are you? One. Otters are so cute. I'm very excited for Bloomboro. Now, Arya, I do not know how you kept that secret away with so many cute things coming our way. And Phoebe, I know Bloomboro will be the set for you, and we will be excited to see what you do here in the VML. And if we are going to have like some Bloomboro themed things. Now, Arya, what about you? Are you excited for the standard rotation?
Very much so. It's always really interesting to see a fresh format and what people bring to it. I mean, I've been really happy with Standard for a while. I think we've done a pretty good job getting it to a good place in terms of deck diversity. And as we go into this larger Standard with Bloomborough, I mean, this has been our first year of really 3 year Standard, and we're going into our second year of it. We're getting a lot more tolerant of these play patterns that are maybe not classically what you've seen in Standard, but we're trying to encourage a little more diversity now. So decks like Temur Analyst, for example, not something you've historically seen in Standard, but a sort of play pattern that we're now being more permissive of, allowing a little more diversity, not just in terms of archetypes but play patterns. And I'm really interested to see like how that pans out with Bloomborough and Duskmon later this year, as we allow more and more decks to do things that Magic decks in Standard fundamentally didn't used to be able to do.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that. Also excited to see how the foundation set will work out, how these cards from Magic history will play out, and some of the basic cards that we see, like Llanowar Wealth, which is such a staple that has been in Magic for many, many years, and hopefully will make it easy for new players to join Standard and join Magic with cards that are more accessible to new players and with a simpler gameplay. Now, I'm really excited for our finals here. I feel like we had a really good top eight. I feel like our stream today has been great. We've been able to cover a lot of different archetypes, a lot of different deck types, just showing how great of a spot Standard is in. Now, Nile, are you okay? We are going. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
So
I'm ready. Let's get into the match.
let's get here into the match. And looks like they are making the decisions. I'm not sure doing draw first. I think here it's seeded choice, right?
That is
Maybe.
correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
World Waker is the 25th seed to, I believe, Texas Rangers 30th seed, so they get to choose whether they go first.
And looks like here a mole to 6 from Texas Ranger does have a better second hand here after Mulligan. And I think we see World Waker deciding where to keep or not. Now, Niall, how do you feel about these opening ends from both players now that we can see both players here?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of exactly what you want to be doing if you are the Convoke player. You get to go 1, 2, 3, and then attack with 4 creatures. I think that's huge. Likewise, I think World Waker is getting to a lot of what they are wanting to do. They get the Analyst out. They've got fires in hand. Oh, the gleeful draw is actually so huge here for Convoke.
Yeah, especially with that recruiter that we know that can enter the battlefield next turn. And we also know that a World Waker does not currently have a board wipe. Also, the mana being a bit awkward here, right? For World Waker not having access to blue yet. There's the virtue though.
Yeah, and I want for a little bit of attention to Aftermath Analyst, not just for its activated ability, but as a blocker in this matchup, where the Boros deck very good at getting its creatures to 2 power, pumping all your creatures by +1/+1/+0 or +1/+1, quite doable, but pretty bad at getting its 1 power creatures to 3 power, and that makes Analyst a surprisingly effective blocker in this matchup, meaning that even in a spot like this, there's definitely some play to World Waker side is very far from over.
And we see their virtue of strength there. Now we might see here the Imudane's recruiter pumping the old team, as you said, Arya. That convenient 1/3 there to do some absorbing of the damage and also getting rid of one of the creatures.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a spot where that like blocking toughness is really going to come up, where not only has that analyst block once, it's going to be representing blocking turn over turn, and we might even see a second analyst off Nissa, which is just yet another blocker. And those creatures that Texas Ranger is losing really do start to add up over time as it becomes harder and harder to go wide around what the analyst deck is doing.
And I really think here that World Waker was really hoping that Nisa would hit another Aftermath Analyst from the second land drop, and it did, meaning that now they do have access to more answers. Now, of course, Texas Rangers can attack with everything, and if Nisa blocks, get rid of it with the Aganjo, but it's still at a cost of a lot of creatures here.
Yeah, this is, I think, a really, really bad spot for Texas Ranger, where there's a bunch of mana now coming off the Nissa, and because of all the channel lands in Graveyard, Worldwaker is going to be gaining a bunch of life as well. So, really hard to keep up over a long game against something like that from the Boros Convoke deck, where at some point or other, Worldwaker is going to find their ill-timed explosions with memory delusions and such, and be able to just close out what the Boros deck is doing.
Yeah, and we see here a lot of life gain from activating that Aftermath Analyst, also getting a bunch of life gain, a lot of lands, a lot of mana from that Nisa. Nile, what does the Boros Convoke deck needs here to get out of this situation?
If we could draw 2 cards off the top of our deck during our draw step, that would help a lot. But no, seriously, we're in a very tricky spot now because, we're in this position that we talked about earlier in the blue-white control matchup, where now the analyst deck just gets to draw and play threats every single turn, and usually going to be at least 2 important cards that they're playing. And that is something that the Convoke deck just can't really keep up with. So we need to somehow be able to deploy, maybe channel our Sokunzan at the end of their turn here, rip like an Imidane's recruiter, and be able to go like reinforcements into our Imidanes, which puts a lot of damage out, but even then I don't know if it's enough. It's definitely looking bad for Convoke.
Yeah, I think in this spot, what the Convoke deck really needs, what Texas Ranger needs, is for the next roughly 15 cards of World Waker's deck to be lands, which is pretty difficult given I don't think there's 15 lands left in World Waker's decks.
Yeah.
Overall, a difficult spot here, but I'm sure after sideboard and on the play, things will be a bit different for Texas Ranger. Arya, who do you think benefits the most from sideboarding?
Definitely the team analyst deck in a matchup like this. Getting those vampires vengeances out of the board is huge. It really represents a way of actually dealing with what this deck has got going on in terms of curve. So losing game one, pretty tough for the Boros Convoke deck, since the post board games are only more of an uphill climb.
Yeah, and we see here the resolute reinforcements. Now there's going to be a Warden of the Inner Sky, but World Waker with so much advantage already on the board, and with that virtue, that World Soul Rage should be enough next turn. Uh, World Soul Rage is a card that I think everyone or a lot of people will be happy to not be seeing a lot in standard after rotation. Nile, do you still think this card will see play after the Temur Analyst rotates?
I mean, it is a strong card, and it is the kind of card where there are a lot of things that could make it, still be very strong. So I think it's entirely likely it continues to see play.
And we see Temur Analyst here taking the win with 50 something damage from World Salt Rage. I mean, at the point that you have two virtues, you have so much mana. Even at one point, this deck main issue was when you doppelganger the virtues and other things, sometimes arena would crash. So sometimes the biggest enemy being the own platform and not actually the deck itself. But what we see here, Arya entering from the Boros Convoke deck side.
Yeah, so I mean, we talked about board wipes being the main thing that matters, and so as a result from Boros, you want to be interacting with the board wipes as much as you can. So Invasion of Gobakhan pretty important, and then something like Urubrask's Forge is kind of tempting in this spot, but I think I like not bringing it in TexasRanger spot because the analyst deck just goes really big in the late game. So damage turn over turn with Urbras Forge might be good against more mid-rangey decks where you're playing post board, but against a deck like analyst, not quite as good because eventually they just kind of go over the top of that one permanent getting a lot of damage in.
Nile, we see there a rest in peace. What do you think of this card in this matchup against the analyst deck?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely strong, being able to exile all of those sacrifice lands is really good. Get creatures out of the yard. Um, I think it's definitely powerful. I don't know if it's the most backbreaking card for analysts, but I think it's definitely something you're happy to see in your hand here.
Yeah, and it really has a different dynamic in how it plays in this matchup than we talked about earlier against like an Azorius control deck, where in a matchup like this, uh, the rest in peace, not really something World Waker can play around by just playing a long, slow controlling game, playing 6 and 7 mana threats. That's just too slow in a matchup like this, so you can't use that route of playing against rest in peace. But at the same time, playing out a 2-drop that doesn't affect the board like Rest in Peace is a much bigger cost to this Boros deck than it is to, say, blue-white control. So while in a matchup like that, we would have maybe seen the Rest in Peace run out as early as turn one, I think it makes a lot of sense for TexasRanger to hold it in this spot until the absolute last minute at which they can deploy it.
And we see here Nurturing Pixie, a fairly recent addition to this deck. There is the Rest in Peace, the Invasion of Gobakhan, also a very key card in this matchup. Looks like World Waker doesn't have too much. I mean, of course, the timed explosion can help, but with this Gobakhan maybe taking it off, things are going to be pretty dire here for World Waker.
In a hand like this for TexasRanger, the really scary thing is something like Nissa, since there's not an answer to that. So while board wipes are good, you really want to make sure there's not a turn 3 Nissa coming down that you can't answer. So it makes a lot of sense to play out Invasion rather than play a proactive card like Resolute Reinforcements, because something like Nissa threatens to completely invalidate what you're doing.
And looks like not only World Waker drew a second timed explosion, but there's also Nissa there. So things can pick up now for World Waker. Looks like we are going to have a close game between the players.
Yeah, though we get to see some of the advantages of this deck post board, where you get to kind of have your threats line up better against the board wipes and kind of play around them a little. Where if World Waker kind of waits to fire off the ill-timed explosion, then the invasion of Gobakon flipping and kind of protecting from it is a big problem. And if World Waker goes for the ill-timed explosion now, then Resolute reinforcements coming down end of turn flips the invasion and kind of puts them in a similar squeeze. So definitely a way you get to kind of like give the matchup a little more texture post board for the Boros Convoke deck, not just make it about whether Tima has a board wipe or not.
And we see that the Nisa Cabaret Courtyard. Nile, what is the elemental that you want from the second land?
That's a great question. I mean, I think I'm just so happy to be having so much mana available here and getting to cast my ill-timed explosion. And
yeah, I mean, it's great. Ill-Time Explosion is an amazing card, and we are going to see here. It also gets rid of Nisa, though. Oh no, it's just for 2.
yeah,
So not even getting rid of Nisa.
Yeah, Aftermath Analyst is kind of the perfect draw in that spot where at this point, even if TexasRanger gets it and flips that invasion of Gobakon, it's going to come at the cost of sacrificing a creature by attacking into Nissa. And then next turn, Woolwick is going to get another spin at getting Analyst off that Echoing Deep. So TexasRanger kind of pressured into getting down this Rest in Peace. But at the same time, if they do get down this Rest in Peace, that's one more turn of not deploying more pressure and giving the Temur deck just a lot more time.
Yeah, and we see here the Rest in Peace getting deployed. As you said, now there's a clock here that it. Ooh, Bonnie Paul is such a great pickup, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is exactly that punish for doing something like playing Rest in Peace, right? We saw TexasRanger kind of be forced to play these more interactive pieces with Rest in Peace, Invasion of Gobakon, kind of trying to stop the Temur deck's plan. But that means that something like Bonnie Paul is really, really strong, getting to just take over the game after there was not much pressure applied early.
Yeah, and we see here even Denisa attacking just to get that trigger from the Bonnie Paul. Now there's an Aftermath Analyst. If that was not enough, a Titan of Industry joins the battlefield that can get rid of an enchantment, so that can get rid of the invasion, I believe. Very good here for World Waker.
yeah, this feels insurmountable if you are the Convoke player. I mean, Bonnie Paul, just such a huge problem. Having the Titan to back it up. We've still got ill-timed explosion. Just really, really devastating.
Yeah, a lot of good things here. I mean, TexasRanger can block with things. There's the reinforcements, but not really winning this game. And by the way, World Waker is up a game, so that means if World Waker finishes the game here, we are going to have a VML winner really soon here for our season 12. Now let's see what TexasRanger is able to pick up, but at this point, I feel like a miracle is needed.
Yeah, I believe that's just 14 damage right here. So TexasRanger is dead, leaving us with the VML champion.
Yeah, congratulations.
Congratulations! World Waker here being our VML champion for season 12 with Temur Analyst. Very well played all day long. Also, congratulations for TexasRanger. Did not win here, but a second place is also very impressive. I mean, Temur Analyst winning the whole thing here. I mean, just 2-0 against this Boros Convoke deck. Did also pretty well against the Azorius deck. Arya, how do you feel about Temur Analyst being the winner here today?
I mean, Analyst is one of my personal favorite decks. Like I said, there's all these play patterns we're encouraging in larger standard, and I myself am a fiend for these non-standard play patterns, for these decks that do weird stuff. I'm kind of known as the FFLer who puts the most weird stuff in her decks. So seeing Analyst succeeding, seeing it be a real deck and a force to be reckoned with, makes me very happy. And excellently played from World Waker. A very well-deserved victory on their part.
What about you, Nile? How do you feel about this win here from World Waker and Temur Analyst?
I mean, extremely well played by both players. So congratulations to World Waker. I also feel like, given that we are just a couple weeks from rotation, I know Analyst and Slogurk are two very popular decks specifically within the VML. So it seems very fitting to me that one of those should have taken the crown of this VML season before rotation. So I'm personally really happy to see Analyst get there. I think it's very fitting for the series as a whole.
And congratulations to our top eight because they also qualified for the regional championship and also the VML championship, which is going to be a 24-player tournament where the top two players will receive an invitation to the following Magic the Gathering Pro Tour, which is huge. A lot of VML players have been crushing it, as we said earlier on, into competitive Magic. I mean, Jason coming in mind immediately. I mean, crushing every event it plays on. So overall, a great season here. 12. I have some thankings to do. I want to thank Phoebe, our amazing producer. Without Phoebe, we couldn't really make this show happen. Here a picture of Phoebe. I want to thank Wizards of the Coast for sponsoring and allowing the VML to be on. I want to thank Arya for being here and for being an amazing guest. And of course, my co host, Nile, which is amazing and really, really, really brings a lot here to the table. So, thank you, both of you. And once again, congratulations here for our VML Season 12 winner. You rock and really deserve this win. It was amazing to see World Waker 2. Congratulations. And I think this is going to close season 12 of the VML. Thank you, all of you, for watching, and we will catch you in the next season.
Bye.